Warren from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm grateful that you've brought us together today to talk about the racial wealth gap with these leading experts. Professor Atkinson, welcome. I am so happy to see you here. You have written about all kinds of consumer debt, but today I want to talk about student loan debt. About 43 million Americans now carry $1.5 trillion in student loans. That's more than Americans owe in auto loans or credit card loans. And that burden of debt is stopping people from buying homes or starting businesses. It's holding our whole economy back. So I want to ask you about who these student borrowers are. Some people have argued that people with student loans are lawyers and doctors who took out debt to go to fancy schools. Professor Atkinson, is that an accurate picture of who has student loans?
Good morning, Senator Warren. It is not an accurate picture. If anything, if we think about fancy schools, and I'll insert here the Ivy League schools to, as example of fancy schools, debt loads are among the smallest among those graduates from those schools. And some of it has to do with those schools have the resources to support students, right? They don't, or else they enroll students who themselves have resources. So instead, some of the schools that tend to have, the highest level of debts are regional schools. For example, one school particularly, I have a set of notes here just to think about this question. Alabama State University, 89% of students leave with an average of $54,000 in student debt. And I want to focus on the word leave. It doesn't mean that they leave with a degree, right? They leave. And so, I think it runs the gamut of community college students, for-profit students, traditional four-year college students, students who are just, believing what we've told them, that if you go out and get an education, your life can be better, and what they get instead is debt.
Thank you so much. That's very powerful. Canceling student loan debt would expand opportunities for millions of people and would provide a massive stimulus for our economy. It is also a racial justice issue. Dr. Hamilton, you've written that canceling student loan debt is, I think my quote here is, one of the quickest actions the president could take to narrow the racial wealth gap. So can you tell us how student loan debt cancellation would help level the playing field, and whether or not canceling $10,000 of student loans is enough to accomplish that goal?
Yeah, first, I hope the Congress acts to cancel student loan debt. But part of the reason why it's one of the quickest actions, because I think that the president can do it through executive action as well. But in a context, maybe we could talk about millennials. During the last Great Recession, we asked millennials to wait out a struggling job market and go to school to better themselves, to get better credentials. And they came out with record levels of debt. If we look at millennials when they were 30 years old in the context of previous generations, they had the lowest home ownership rate as every other generation, dating all the way back to the greatest generation that was coming out of the Great Depression. And what's more, the racial disparity in home ownership amongst millennials is as large as it's ever been since we've ever been recording the data. So on the one hand, it's immoral when we tell people this is your pathway for upward mobility. Then we saddle them with debt that limits their capacities to get other forms of assets so that they can accumulate wealth. So prospectively, we're looking at a generation that came out of the Great Recession, and now we're about to scar them with this pandemic recession. So we certainly need government to act to change their reality. And it's not just millennials. We have people collecting Social Security that are still paying student debt. So this is a moral justice issue that has disparate racial effects. And in the 21st century, it's sad that we're still talking about financing a debt-free college education for all Americans.
Well, as you know, Leader Schumer and I have a plan to cancel $50,000 in student loan debt. So let me just ask you, how much progress would that make in helping close the racial wealth gap in America?
Yeah, I'm for full cancellation, but if the practical reality is 50, it's a lot better than 10,000, especially when we consider the fact that On average, 4 years after graduation, a Black graduate has about $50,000 in debt in relation to $30,000 for a white graduate, which is also intolerably too high.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. You know, canceling $50,000 of student loan debt is the single most effective executive action available to get our economy going and to make progress toward closing the racial wealth gap. And I hope President Biden decides to do this. Thank you both so much for being with us today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.